Hey kiddies, it's Triple Feature Tuesday once again, and this week we're going to look at Paul Dano getting the shit kicked out of him.
Why is everybody always picking on me?
I got the idea for this one at the local bar, the One World Cafe, where I hang out every Sunday. And the bartender on that evening is usually Stefan. Stefan is wonderful, but he also bears a striking resemblance to actor Paul Dano. One week, Prisoners was on, and all this, we're watching it, and I just turned to him, man, Steph, your doppelganger's getting the shit kicked out of him. And then the week after that, Looper came on. And so 2 means I have to find 3, and so I found 3. So our menu is going to include Prisoners, Looper, and There Will Be Blood. Now, Prisoners is just a rough movie. It's about Jake Gyllenhaal trying to find Hugh Jackman's kids, and Hugh Jackman trying to find Hugh Jackman's kid. Actually, one of his daughter and also his buddy Terrence Howard's daughter have been kidnapped. And Hugh thinks that Paul Dano did it. Now, Paul Dano plays a character named Alex Jones. Oh, also should say that there will be spoilers for all of these movies, so you have been warned. Paul Dano plays Alex Jones, a mentally handicapped fellow, seen driving a Winnebago around the girls around the time that they disappeared. And so Hugh Jackman thinks that he was, if not the actual kidnapper, involved in the kidnapping. So he does what any normal father would do. He kidnaps Paul Dano, chains him in an abandoned apartment building, and beats the holy hell out of him for the entire movie. Just each time we go back to this apartment building, Paul Dano has worse bruises and worse bruises until eventually Hugh has locked him in a makeshift hot box that he'd made out of a shower. He basically walled off a shower, nailed it shut with Paul Dano in it, and has complete control over the water, when it comes on, how much of it comes on, how hot it is, or how cold it is. And basically just keeps torturing him to get information. And as it turns out, while related to the people that did actually kidnap the girls, Paul Dano really didn't kill them. He, it turns out, is actually one of the original victims of the kidnappers and was raised accordingly. So it's really, really just terrible to watch this simple man get the crap kicked out of him for 2 hours. On top of the fact that it's just terrible watching this Hugh Jackman's family disintegrate because they can't find the daughter, and Jake Gyllenhaal's Detective Loki becoming more and more obsessed with finding her. So we start the triple feature with Prisoners because there's nowhere to go but happier, because Jesus Christ, this movie is just brutal. But it was really, really good. Next up, we have Rian Johnson's Looper, where Joseph Gordon-Levitt plays a young hitman, or looper, who kills people that are sent back in time for him to kill. Everything is going well until his own future self comes back in time for him to kill. See, the way it works is the hitmen, the loopers, kill all of the people from the future that are sent to them. But at the end of their time as a looper, their older self from 30 years in the future will be sent back, and you end up killing your older self. It's called closing your loop. Now, Paul Dano plays Seth. Seth is as close to a friend as Joseph Gordon-Levitt has. Joseph Gordon-Levitt playing Joe. So Seth is as close as a friend as Joe has. Seth failed to close his loop. He recognized that it was himself, and, for whatever reason, couldn't kill 30 years older Seth. Now, this is where it gets to be a problem, because we can't have, 30 years from the future Seth running around in the present. The mob bosses end up getting their hands on young Seth, young Paul Dano, or no, just normal age Paul Dano, but young Seth. And they get old Seth to come to him. And I gotta tell you, it's one of the scariest things I've ever seen in a movie, because it starts off with the older Seth having scars appear on his arm, telling him where to be and when. And the longer Seth delays in getting there, parts of him keep disappearing. They're disappearing because the Paul Dano version of Seth is being operated on, and they're just cutting off fingers, noses, hands, arms, feet, everything until old Seth shows up, and it's just really gruesome. And even though you don't actually see Paul Dano getting the crap kicked out of him, you know what's happening to him as you watch older Seth. Every part of him is being removed, and then eventually he's going to just be killed for the trouble. Ugh. But Looper is just a much more fun movie than Prisoners because it's sci-fi and, time travel and goofiness. And, well, I mean, it's goofy enough with all the makeup on Joseph Gordon-Levitt's face so he can sort of look like Bruce Willis from the right angle. It works more than you'd think it would, but I'm not going to say it works perfectly. Which, well, that is in reference to the makeup. In reference to the movie, yeah, you can say about the same, but it's very, very entertaining. It was just nice to see Paul Dano. He's in it for maybe 10 minutes, but, it's Paul Dano. We like him. That's part of the reason why we're doing this. Finally, we have There Will Be Blood, which I hope everybody's seen at this point. It was fairly popular because it's a very, very great movie. Paul Thomas Anderson directed and, I want to say, at least co-written, if not completely written. Paul Dano plays the twin brothers Paul and the Reverend Eli Sunday of the Sunday family, who have a whole bunch of land in Little Boston, which is sitting on top of what could be a giant oil well. Self-described oil man Daniel Plainview, played by Daniel Day-Lewis, wants the oil, and so he comes into not necessarily confrontation with Eli, who is sort of the de facto patriarch of the family since Dad doesn't seem to, have two brain cells to rub together. Eli wants a bunch of money for the land. Daniel promises a lot of money to Eli for the land, and it's sort of vague as to... You assume that Daniel does eventually give him the money, but it seems to take some doing because Daniel is loath to give up any money, especially to somebody, to a religious person like Eli. He just doesn't like him. And Eli, in turn, exacts petty revenges on Daniel Plainview in order to get his money and, secure his station in life. The movie, at the end, has a time jump, which is different from time travel in Looper, into the future, where Daniel is wildly successful, but living as a reclusive alcoholic. And Eli shows up under the guise of nostalgia and reminiscing, but really to get money because he's bankrupted his own church and desperately needs funds and thinks he can kind of scam something out of Daniel. It turns out that Eli has really no hands. He does not have any real cards in his poker hand, and Daniel couldn't care less. Not only couldn't care less to the extent that he ends up beating Paul Dano to death with bowling pins in his own private bowling alley. It's quite ridiculous and borderline silly. This is, of course, after he has made Eli, renounce the God that he claims to love so much, for money. But the beating is brutal and absurd. And at the end of the movie, the butler comes down and he sees Daniel with the bloody body and everything. And Daniel famously says, "I'm finished," thus finishing the movie. Either way, we have 3 movies in which Paul Dano gets the snot kicked out of him for our entertainment, and it's just, highly amusing to me that he bears such a resemblance to my buddy Steph. Our movies were Prisoners, Looper, and There Will Be Blood, and I'll see you guys next week.